So, very interesting articles popping up at the moment, especially in and around the conservative sphere that I'm seeing at the moment. And they are all quite hilarious in many ways, but they all do follow one very, very similar theme. And that is, of course, being the, well, look, we lost big time at our election. We almost got wiped out below 100 seats. That was a very real possibility. Luckily, we managed to survive. How on earth do we rebuild our party and go back? And as I've said many times on this channel, until the Conservatives actually have a serious, proper, introspective look at themselves and actually look themselves squarely in the mirror and realize what was going on, what their party has become, there ain't any way back for them. And they ain't even contemplating doing that yet. They have, Kimmy Badenoch especially has come in and just smashed all the mirrors. The idea that she is going to have some sort of real comprehensive look at how the Conservative Party should be and act and change the way. No, just look at the shadow cabinet, and we've talked about that before in other videos. But the Conservatives and a lot of Conservatives are now trying to say that they should look at the Trump victory and say, what can we take from this? And yet, if you are really conservative, and you should not be taking anything, because once again, as I like to say, our two voting blocks, the British voting public and of average American voters, vastly different. Vastly different. They are not the same. And we have seen this when the Conservatives have tried to import the culture wars over to the UK. Have they been successful? No. They have not been successful at all. Whereas in America, you very, very much saw them be somewhat of a vote winner, but then very, very quickly you started to then see, oh, all that is very, very shallow rhetoric that is making for very bad policies. You saw the book banning policies that have been brought in, which have now been turned on a lot of the Republican Christian books that they want to keep as sort of a revenge for banning ours. Oh, you're going to ban our books? Well, we're going to get yours banned too. To a point now where they are looking at undoing this law because it is so bad. But you might see under Trump, maybe those policies start spreading across America. But again, you're going to see the exact same thing of, this is a really dumb policy. This is a really bad idea. Like, why are we doing this? No matter how good the rhetoric is, if it's a bad policy, it's a bad policy, and people will see it for what it is. But this is what we are at least now seeing on this. So I think it's well worth having a look at this, because it is interesting to see how our current Conservative Party might maybe take some stuff from Trump. I don't think they will, honestly, because I don't think they're capable of replicating it at all, but they will try. And once again, we will probably see them try and fail, because this happens every single time. Every single time. Every single time something happens in America with like the Republicans, they instantly go, oh, can we do the same here? And no, it fails. Because your average British voter and your average American voter, vastly different. Vastly different. So let's crack on then into Conservative Home and their version of what the Conservative Party should do. And bear in mind, they have done already 2 or 3 different posts on this by different people. However, I want to go over this guy in particular, a guy called Gavin Walsh, who was an advisor on foreign affairs to the Conservative Party. So it's more interesting to see what he has to say, because he was at one point part of the Conservative machine. So before we do go on into this, please do remember to have a look, click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this and have a good laugh at this. So, what should the Conservative Party should and should not take from Trump's victory? Bear in mind, he is the only guy, part of the reason why we're doing this, because he's actually come out and said, actually, there's some stuff we shouldn't take. So Let's begin on this. So this time he begins Trump won. He might even, counting, and it's still going on as at the time this goes to press, win the popular vote. And yes, he has, I believe, won the popular vote. The first time a Republican has done so, of course, in the past 20 years. His victory is one false and, of course, many true lessons for the Conservative Party. The false one is about policy. US political observers like to imagine policies as a rational policy debate, but it seldom is. And that is very, very true. You saw very, very bad policy debate, not only in America, but I think the Harris campaign did a very, very bad translation of this is what policy should mean. This is what the policy we are intending to do is going to have, or the policy that we've done should do. I think you saw that very, very negatively. You saw Kamala Harris, as I think it's becoming very, very clear um, why they lost, is that this was an anti-establishment vote. People were fed up of Biden, and she did not distance herself enough, make herself different enough from Biden. They still suffered from the exact same policy. Well, there's the problem. I said Biden was having even before the election started, which was he was not going out and explaining this is the policy that we've done. This is the Inflation Reduction Act that we did. This has reduced inflation. This is the CHIPS Act. This is what that means. They did not go out and explain what their policy was because they could not seem to get that message out right and correctly. It is the exact same problem Harris had as well. But back to this. So most voters, of course, understand very little of the details of policies outside of the specialist area that they may have interest in. The 19th century phrase "men, not measures" is a very better way to think about how they judge candidates. Policy is merely one out of several signs of the process when they decide who to vote for. Rhetorical style, physical manner, body language, the impression of the character conveyed, they all contribute and often dominate. And that is very true for American elections. It has been borne out many, many, many times that you could have the most expert, knowledgeable president in history, but if he is boring, if he is not charismatic, if he cannot, you know, get his body language to sort of convey stuff, he would lose to someone like Donald Trump very, very easily. Very, very easily indeed. Boris Johnson, for all his flaws, would do far, far better as a politician in America than he ever really would have done here in the UK. Like, if we were the same, political voting bloc and British voters had that same thing, they would have dominated. But guess what? The British voting public saw through him. They very quickly learned, oh, all that, is just bluster. But it took voting him in and realizing that for the British voting public to realize that. Again, still America doesn't seem to have learned that lesson, but that is unfortunately a big contributor that goes on in American politics. But back to this. This one, of course, is a very presentation is the art of Trump has now mastered. You know where you are with him, not because of his policies, but it's the same policies in a different vessel would look very different indeed. Those who agreed with him all want a party now to copy his ideology, but this would be best avoided. The low salience of policy is very different from thinking he won't actually carry them out, which is what is terrifying, because this is something else, and he brings up with this in a moment, that this is true. We are seeing this of a lot of people doing that anti-establishment vote, but thinking, oh, Trump won't really do all that stuff. He won't really go through with mass deportations. He will. He will absolutely try it. He might get stopped maybe along the way if they're lucky, but it's a massive if. It's a massive risk to roll the dice on. If you need a 6 to roll and you're rolling a d6, still 1 in 6 chance you might roll a 6. You know, it's a lot to risk on the roll of that dice. So back to this. When speaking to, of course, Trump supporters during the campaign, I would bring one or another alarming thing he has, of course, promised. And the response was inevitably that, well, he won't really do that. They expect him to at least try. And of course, this time, to do it without the staffers willing to sabotage him in the national interest. And that is very true. Because of Project 2025, the people who are going to be around him this time is going to be a different, vastly different setup, vastly different, and we could very well see that very quickly. Hopefully, it might turn out as bad as the first Trump years. Yes, Trump did a lot of damage, but a lot of it was mitigated. So it wasn't as bad as people were thinking it was. This time, of course, with things like Project 2025, the actual plan to sort of do and do all this stuff, yeah, it could be a lot worse than last time around. We'd be probably in a better situation if it was as bad as last time around, with all the chaos in the White House. Likely, of course, to happen again. I don't doubt there'll be, chaos in the White House, but there are going to be some competent people who know sort of exactly what they're doing. So he will, of course, now begin the purges of civil servants he doesn't like to replace them with loyalists. Yep, that's what's terrifying. That's another thing that's going to be very terrifying. Schedule F. This, of course, won't necessarily help him, at least in the beginning, because the loyalists will not know what they are doing and will gain the administration and will get the administration caught up in legal challenges, opposition from states, or even other interest groups, and so on. The main effect will now be instability, constant lawsuits, plenty of drama. He will, of course, try to deport undocumented immigrants by the millions, and reform will now inevitably ask why this cannot be done here. Hint: the European Convention rights is not the only reason. Again, it's very true. Next, of course, a trade war with China is a certainty. One with the EU could also happen very easily. And while Britain would, of course, benefit from staying out, perhaps even serving discreetly as a conduit for US EU trade, it might come under pressure to choose sides. The EU takes 40% of British trade, the US around 20%. Services trade is particularly important in US EU relations, but it is now harder to actually measure. The UK could find itself caught in between. This is what I've talked about, that if this trade war does break out, we're going to have to choose a side. Like we are going to have to choose a side. Trump, in a way, has brought about almost the beginning of the end of Brexit. Like this Trump trade war he's going to start, the tariffs he's going to do, is really the beginning of the end of Brexit. Because the whole grand master plan of Brexit and global Britain was that we were going to just say zero tariffs to everyone, and the world will somehow follow suit, and it'll be amazing. It'll be wonderful. Just ignore any of the inconvenient consequences of that. It'll be wonderful. This is going to have to make the decision. Like, they are going to have to choose a side. Starmer is going to have to choose a side. Ultimately, he will side with the EU. Because you are not, you look at the numbers right there, 40% of British trade. US is 20%. Who are we going to end up siding with? We're siding with Europe and the EU. Yeah, the idea that will be some sort of secret conduit for trade, like stuff will come into the UK and then out into yeah, no, that's not going to work. That is not going to work. But I guarantee you'll see a lot of Brexiteers say that. That, oh, that's how you can get around these US restrictions if you're in the EU. Don't think that's going to happen. But they will say it. So, apart from, of course, the effects of a trade war on China, the risk, of course, that the US abandons Ukraine is the most stark. And I did a full ponytail video about this as well. The Tories can obviously help stiffen Republican spines, both in Congress and in continuing US support for building the resilience of frontline strategies, stages against the Kremlin and subversion and, of course, propaganda. Yeah, I don't think the Tories are going to help that because with this Trump win, it is very, very obvious now that once again, the Republicans are going to end up doubling down on the MAGA stuff. What I was generally hoping for in the video that I made, oh, is this the end of the MAGA era? Are they going to dump Trump? Well, there were lots of signs ahead, lots of openly talking about this. If Trump does not win, they're going to get rid of Trump. They will dump him. They will get rid of him. And that eventually that will probably signal the end of the MAGA movement as it slowly dies off over time. But that's not the case now. So I do not see how the Tories can actually help stiffen Republican spines. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is going to be down to people like David Lammy, Keir Starmer to that. It's going to be more a Labour job to do that. And at that point, maybe we shouldn't be focusing so much in the US if they are going to abandon them, because there's plenty of rhetoric in the Republican Party and the MAGA lunatics wanting to do that. That's not going to change if you come up against one of those. How is that going to help stiffen their spines when they are committed to that cause already? Once again, it's the EU and people in Europe and countries in Europe where we need to do that and focus on that. Once again, which side are we going to choose? Which side are we going to come down on? Like I say, the beginning of the end of Brexit. So back to this. So both in Congress and continuing support. So here we are. So here we are. So, but of course, Trump's hostility to Ukraine isn't only diverged from whatever strategic relationship he has with Vladimir Putin. It also sees alliances now as a drain on US resources. Here, the Tories can also work domestically. The UK government has appeared now to soften compared to the Tory administration, tending now to a little closer to Scholz's Germany and the highly anticipated and engaged Nordic, Baltic, Polish bloc of European states. Britain should be a leading member of the Northeastern Arc, and the Conservative Party should press Labour to give it the support that it needs. And it is. I have seen this. We are sort of leaning towards that. I think the deal that we've done with Germany, that's nothing. That clearly indicates we are leaning towards that, and that there needs to be a lot more talk between European NATO members, about European strategic autonomy from America, because that includes all of us. That we need strategic. We very much do need that strategic autonomy, very, very much so. It's just how we can make it happen, and that comes from all of us working together on that. So once again, yeah, we're going to end up siding with the EU, with Europe. So back to this. So Trump's victory also has major implications for political campaigning. The starkest, of course, is the outside importance of charisma in today's social media age, where candidates now cultivate direct relationships with voters. Trump, of course, didn't invent the skill at communication, though he hides it now in apparent incurity. It was always very clear what he means. Obama won huge victories that were followed by very indifferent voting record, by governing record, rather than, of course, readdressing the alignments. Both Trump and Obama were just simply extremely very good campaigners. Be better at campaigning then. It's not that hard. You need to have good people who can campaign. And it's all about sending out that message. How many times I've said on this channel, it is all about the message you send out to the voters. Doesn't matter about your charisma, etc. That can be learned. That can be taught. That can be sorted out. Public speaking is a skill you can learn. You can go out and you can learn how to do it better. But what matters is what exactly you are saying. So, and again, shallow rhetoric is not a good replacement for bad policy. If it is a bad policy, it is a bad policy. No matter what rhetoric you deploy with it, we saw this with Boris Johnson. You know, if 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 this is an argument now to bring back Boris Johnson, um, he would do absolutely awful. If Boris Johnson had somehow stayed, Boris Johnson would be absolutely terrible. He would probably have lost maybe even more seats uh, for them. He would have probably lost even more. They might have dipped below 100. But back to this. But Harris, perhaps because of a campaign was, of course, very too brief. Perhaps because she's very struggled after too many years of the prosecutor putting on a case now to convey who she was. Right at the end of the campaign, one would hear voters responding with, "I don't know what she stands for." Pundits will often make the mistake that a demand for policy detail. It isn't. It is a demand for a story, and Harris simply didn't supply one convincing enough. Exactly. When you are look at elections, you compare the 2019 election to the 2024 election. What was the story of that Boris Johnson was telling? Boris Johnson was telling, "I'm the only one who can get Brexit done. Once we do Brexit, we are going to unleash this leveling up campaign. We will become global Britain." That was the story he was telling. What was the story his opponent was telling, which was, of course, Jeremy Corbyn at the time? What was the story he was telling? It wasn't, because Corbyn was a bad campaigner, particularly in 2019. Very, very bad. I know that angers a lot of people, but that was true. You know, he lost in a very, very big way because of that. Because Boris Johnson could tell a better story than Jeremy Corbyn could. You fast forward to this election, what story did we have? We had one of Keir Starmer saying, "You've had 14 years of very terrible, awful Tory rule. The past 4 years have been even worse. Do you want to continue on this tale of absolute shambles, or do you want to come over to us, let us, you know, be in charge of the government, where we can actually get proper, good, competent government rolling again?" Guess what? He is doing that right now. Proper, good, boring, safe, competent governments. And so far, that's what we have seen. Not only has Keir Starmer succeeded in telling that story, he is actually now employing that. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak was, I don't know. It was an absolute disaster. Let's face it. There was no story Sunak was really telling. So back to this. But of course, if there is one more transferable lesson to draw on, as it seems increasingly an advantage for the right, and that's capitalism. The free market in America, but also in the UK, is understood to be about self-improvement and self-realization. When the left promises to help you, remember that Labour rhetoric about these things that people desperately need, it casts you as a victim. Gone apparently is Bill Clinton's understanding of this. Well, we'll give people a give people a hand up, not a handout. And yet, how can you translate this over to UK politics when the British voting public clearly has said it wants good public services? Yeah, it wants good public services. It wants those handouts. Look at the throwaway you've had of the winter fuel allowance. That's a handout. And yet, the Conservatives continue to say, "Oh, well, we'll have, lower taxes, and the state should do less." Okay, what is the state going to do less of? you know, um, these instincts are, of course, able for the Tories to seize, and of course, Badnoch, if she can actually either control or even fully own her habit of shouting her mouth off, has a story that embodies it. But will it actually resonate with the British voting public? I do not think it will. Do not think it will, because a first PMQs was a disaster by all accounts. A fourth instinct, of course, is to be on the right side of strength and initiative versus the consensus. Here, Starmer and, quote, the centrists in general are weak. They are creatures of compromise, wets indeed. Yet this authority has to be cultivated. A terrible election defeat is no time for shallow aggressivity. The party needs to earn the right to be assertive again, though through some ostentatious now listening. And again, that's not going to happen. This whole thing. Oh, but what if it's good stuff? It leads to good policy. It leads to good outcome. You've already seen this with Keir Starmer in response to Ed Davey. That even though you might have a good GDP, what matters is what's in people's pockets. And it is good that Starmer has said that, because it changes the way and it shows the different way that he and his government are thinking of things. Whereas the Conservatives are all about, line go up, and that must be good for everyone when it's reality not. Starmer's literally said, yeah, the line might be going up, but at the end of the day, what's in people's pockets? That's how we are going to measure and have a look at these things. And that fundamentally is a completely different way, which I always said would happen. That once you get in this Starmer government, you will see them thinking and doing things far differently than this Conservative government. And we are seeing that. And that is good. That is very, very good. So back to this. So, of course, Trump will, of course, bring the drama and chaos to the United States and unpredictability to now foreign affairs. Tory can, of course, use their credibility with Republicans to actually reduce this somewhat, particularly when related to Ukraine. They won't. Yeah. How do you deal with a MAGA Republican? MAGA Republican is always like, why are we sending all this money to Ukraine? We shouldn't be sending it all. How do you reduce that? Speaking to a MAGA Republican who's that's main talking point. JD Vance is all about throwing Ukraine under the bus. But of course, they should now obviously spend some time applying lessons of the 2012 campaign to their own plans for revival. Again, the revival plans, if it is attached, well, it's going to be just as a disaster. It ain't going to work whatsoever. Yes, as someone said here, yeah, assuming that Mr. Trump doesn't an about turn actually decide to represent democracy after all, we can price in a landslide anti-Republican vote in 2029. Maybe. Yeah, so I think this is it. Yeah, I suspect that one feeling Tories will draw from this result is nostalgia about their own one-time populist big dog Johnson, as they stare now into a void of another crushing defeat in 2029. Yeah, would not surprise me if there are some Conservatives thinking about Johnson. If you have read Unleashed, he does constantly hint at the idea of a political comeback. Someone else says here, no mention, of course, Monsieur Farage in this piece. Farage is now pretty much the only British politician who has direct and easy access to the next US president. Questionable on that, at least. The Labour Party have, of course, screwed up its relationship with the US Republicans. The Conservative Party needs a long rest before the next leadership election. Trump, I like that. Long rest before the next leadership election. Yeah, very true. Trump, of course, does not like David Cameron. Of course, William Hague does not like Trump. So in all, the Westminster politicians have done their best to, of course, get things wrong. That just leaves Nigel Farage grinning from ear to ear as the only man in the Palace of Westminster who will be welcome in the White House after January the 20th. Still, Donald Trump has now a once-in-a-lifetime battle and strife now behind him. He and, of course, copes well, of course, with adversity. He probably doesn't. And, of course, insults in general. But the British government, of course, needs to mind its manners in the future. We will need the Americans, even if they may not need us. Yeah. Yeah. I don't like this as well. Big opportunity to get that good post-Brexit trade deal with the US. But I doubt if Starmer's Labour Party will actually be up for it. To which someone replies, Mr. Trump would only conclude a trade deal, and this I think is very true, if it benefits him personally, his family, and the United States. And unless it satisfies all these three conditions, there will be no trade deal. And in the event that it would be even more one-sided than the deals we secured with the EU, Australia, and New Zealand. Someone else then says, There is no question Farage in his campaign to remake the UK right is going to be leading on the one big man who can deliver a trade deal with the US, thereby saving the Brexit, which he and more than anyone brought upon us. But there must be some doubt as to whether an all around protectionist US under Trump's leadership and Republican control of Congress would actually be interested in making the Labour government's attitude irrelevant. There would, of course, be a very much mismatch between the UK's and US interests in any plausible bilateral trade deal. Certainly, such a deal, amongst other negative effects, is likely to be catastrophic for UK agriculture and the City of London. The former now rendered wholly uneconomic, and the latter now reduced to being a back office support operation. Whilst it may also contain conditions to reduce our trade with other markets against which the US will be focusing its protectionist efforts, such as China and, of course, the EU, Mr. Wall's suggestion that we might be a conduit for essentially evading the tariff regimes of the US and the EU can hardly be serious. It is the status now of contraband countries like Azerbaijan or even Kazakhstan evading Western sanctions on Russia. The danger, indeed, is being forced to choose sides. And ultimately, for multiple reasons, that must mean Europe, not the US. The advent of Trump marks the beginning of the end of Brexit, but it will be a very tough ride. I do really think that is very much true. Um, Someone else then replied to that. I do not think we need to worry about Trump's efforts in agriculture or the city. Reeves has already done so much damage to them that they will not be left. There won't be much left to Trump or anyone else to concern us about. What has Reeve done? She's put a tax on massive landowners. Your average farmer is not affected by it. But once again, it is the big boys like, James Dyson who bought a massive parcel of land as a tax loophole to pay less tax. Um, oh look, who's whining about it now? Um, Europe or even a US desperately trying to add tariffs to any imports that they can. I cannot fathom how anyone can even be unsure which area we should focus on in trade for the next 4 years. Trump's policy is literally saying, we do not want your stuff. Whether he implants his tariff plan or not, it is clear his agenda is not a positive one for any strong trade deals with the UK. Yeah, exactly. Correct. The problem is now far wider than bilateral trade position for the UK and US. Trump is a leading participation of a worldwide shift away from the free trade order, which was essential for the economic premise of Brexit and its global vision of globally trading Britain. Again, very very true. That US UK trade deal was central to the idea of Brexit. That is it. It's the beginning of the end of Brexit. They've tried to implement this. They are not going to do it. Um, yeah, our credibility with the Republicans. One doubts that Trump actually even knows Badnoch's name or even how to pronounce it. Again, very true. Someone else said here again the thing about Ukraine. This is someone again doesn't understand why we're backing Ukraine. This guy says it is time to stop us writing open checks for Ukraine. They've had 2 years to get a result, but they have failed. It is not just the US for which Ukraine now is, of course, drained on resources. But to which someone said, if you want to back someone who has killed people on the streets of the UK, that is up to you. But I will never and never will. And if Ukrainians are now willing to die to push him out, then we should absolutely support them. We have a choice of either helping Ukraine to fight Russia on their doorstep or fighting them now a lot closer to home in 10 years or so. And during those 10 years, they will spend a lot of trying to push further to destabilize the West. Who do you think it will be cheaper and more effective? I know which I will prefer. Again, very, very true. Yes. 1 year passed between the German invasion of Poland and the start of the London Blitz. My country does not see the destruction of Ukraine now as a heartrending regional conflict. It will come here. We need not imagine it. And that was based on Boris. Um, Let's see if there's any more fun ones to sort of lead. This is a fun one. So the US will, of course, remain our most important trade and defense partner. It will remain the world's leading economic area. Well, if Trump institutes economic policies, not going to be a good policy for either of those, is it? The EU is in relative decline. No, it's not. This will be accelerated by the Trump presidency. No, it won't. And yet, all UK establishment parties prefer to cozy up to the EU. If Kemi is really about breaking the mold, she will support the US in a trade war with the EU. To which someone then replies, "The EU as a whole is more than twice as important as as the US as the UK trade partner. Trump presidency is far more likely to deepen European economic integration and defense autonomy than actually diminish it. But you are right to point out the growing strengths of the US relatively to the EU since the beginning of this century. A gap that Europe can only recover if it becomes more like the US, i.e., more united. And the consequences of that coming and now attempted by the US to crush China as a rival power are most uncertain. In particular, as to where this now leaves the UK being forced to choose between the US and the EU in these circumstances. We have, and of course, our politicians are so defined, politics are so defined by it. It now seems the real prospect will be immensely disruptive. Amongst other things, it will surely cause the Conservative Party to be subsumed into reform. Um, I think Badnock may try to position the conservatives as a Republicans abroad type offshoot, and may even go as far as to support a trade war against the UK if she felt that it would damage the Labour Party. But if Trump shows no interest, she may need a new approach to her leadership. But that's already what Farage is going to do. Absolutely. Um, so yeah, already there's some interesting things. Will they actually take anything from it? I don't think they will. I don't think they will. I think it'll be foolish too. I think they will be really foolish too, because the British voting public and the American voting public vastly different priorities, wanting very different things. Ultimately, I do think there's some interesting, examples there, because Gavin Walsh does bring up the thing about choosing a side. If he says here, the UK could find itself caught between the US and the EU and these things. Does it choose a side? Who does it choose? It's gonna choose Europe economically, politically, defense wise. It all the signs are pointing that we'll do that. And then what happens to once again the Eurosceptic side in the Conservative Party? What do they do? This will once again reopen the Brexit arguments in the Conservative Party. It will probably reopen many Brexit arguments, maybe in the Labour Party, to which we'll have to push them to maybe start to talk about Brexit more. We've already seen them talk about Brexit initially, but they're going to have to talk about it more. You can't escape it. And we end up in this situation where that is now where we are. We are caught between a potential trade war between the US and the EU. Where do we side? Who do we side with? The EU is more important to us in a ton of different areas and aspects. So, yeah, it's the beginning of the end of Brexit. It has killed these Trump tariffs, will kill the main central notion of Brexit, that the world is going to be this massive, open, free trade buccaneering era, and that the UK is really just getting out there as the first country. It's really going to take it out there. It's killed the global Britain argument. Absolutely killed the global Britain argument stone dead. And that was the last thing they were riding on, with all those trade deals during the Pacific Partnership, the Saudi Arabia thing that they pursued as well shortly before the end, the Indian trade deal that they tried to do as well. None of those things, we might get two of them. We know we're probably going to end up in the Pacific Partnership, although again won't be very useful to us at all. Neither will the Saudi Arabia one either. The Gulf Partnership either. That won't be useful. obvious, as I said many, many times. Um, the second we left, our path back was already determined. It just depended what the world was going to end up like, and we are going to sort of see ourselves pushed closer, a lot closer to Europe. Um, and then you have to start asking the questions then, because people will. They will go, well, what was the point of Brexit? And we are almost there. Once people openly start doing that, saying, well, actually, what was the point of Brexit? That's when the questions start. And we are not too far away now, I believe, from having that conversation. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. But will the Conservatives take anything from this Trump victory? I think there is that nostalgic danger that maybe they want to appeal to Boris Johnson or something like that. Maybe they try to push um, Kimmy Badnock on some areas. The Ukraine stuff, how they clearly, or at least this guy clearly has not encountered a MAGA Republican. Again, JD Vance, all about throwing Ukraine under the bus. You know, so yeah, uh, they're going to have, I think, big questions themselves to answer. What does this relationship look like? And the person to answer those questions, or at least the person leading on those, is Priti Patel. Good luck. Good luck on that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.